Yeah, just give me a second. Need to take a sip of my tea real quick. Good stuff. Wow, didn't expect it to make that loud of a noise. Um, yeah, so I didn't expect this to be the first video that I made in regards to coming to this channel and starting this new channel. If you're coming from my old channel, thank you guys for your patience. Thank you guys for coming over. And pretty soon we'll be making content. I'm just yeah. Like I said, if you saw the post as to why I stopped posting on my last channel, then yeah, you know what I'm doing. Anyway, so yeah, let's just talk about what's on my mind. So there's this new movie that just came out called Sinners, by Ryan Coogler, and it stars Michael B. Jordan and Haley Steinfeld, and it's a vampire flick. It's not the type of vampire flick that you would expect, but it's a vampire flick. And there's this I'm seeing now, because I should start here. I did delete Instagram and Snapchat, for reasons. I'm just officially done with those platforms of social media, but I still have Facebook because from my I can't freaking speak. Family reasons. Because other than WhatsApp, or other than using WhatsApp, Facebook is a great way to connect with my grandmother, who's in a whole other country, along with other family and friends as well. And yeah, so with that, like, Facebook is like the only thing that I have. But yeah, this I'm seeing on social media, and even in Google, which is crazy. There's this narrative going around with this movie, right? With this movie Sinners. And don't get me wrong, Sinners is a great movie artistically. Hold on. Excuse me. Had to burp. But artistically, Sinners is a great movie. I will say that. Like, Ryan Coogler he definitely has a way of showcasing his artistry when it comes to film. And yeah, dude has a vivid imagination, very vivid, and he does a great job of displaying that on the big screen. So I give dude his props there. But there is this constant narrative that I'm seeing going around among the black demographic, that after seeing this movie, there's this constant narrative, as it is with all movies that have to do with or that take place in a time during the transatlantic slave trade, in the times of slavery, or before slavery, and it has to do with like Africa, like African culture, like the movie like The Woman King, right? There's this narrative going around that, like, oh yeah, like this is what we need to return to, like we got to get back to this, us as black people, like this is our culture, this is our heritage, we got to love it, we got to protect it, we got to return to it, and not let anybody take it away from us, all this other stuff, right? And this is my issue with this, right? I should start here, because I understand, and I'm sympathetic towards people of my skin color. I'm sympathetic towards those people who really have a connection with this stuff, and a connection in the sense of like when they learn about the history of what happened to our forefathers during the transatlantic slave trade. and they learn of the atrocities that were committed against us, such as like fighting each other for scraps, just for the pure entertainment of the slave owners, being lynched, being hanged, castrated, whipped, and so on and so forth, a bunch of other just atrocities. These people, they hear these things, and I don't think anybody should have to go through that, right? Nobody should have to go through these things. And then they kind of learn about okay, what was it that what was it like before this, and they get into this, they start to see like how African culture is very heavily deep, very deep in pagan and spiritual practices, like juju, voodoo, and hoodoo and stuff, right? With oracles, or I should say like seers, like future seers, different practices with like herbs and roots, different practices with like objects, like taking a bunch of objects and like tossing them on the board to see like what's the outcome of like a certain event or a future event, asking the ancestors that passed before you for like guidance or wisdom, contacting like familiar spirits and so and stuff. And I think the mistake that a lot of people make is they see this and they think, oh yeah, if this is what we practice, then it's got to be right? Like this is what it's got to be, right? And it doesn't help that the media, especially like Hollywood, they push this narrative, they really push this narrative on us that this is all we did, like we were kind of like, because even when you get into it too, it wasn't just these things. Like there's also some very violent, very very disgusting practices as well with these in some of these ancient African cultures. So much so that I'll even say as a black person, I'm not proud of it. So I won't even say them on here, but you do your research, and it's moral of the story is black people, we're not perfect. We're not saints either. Our hands aren't clean. Like it's not like, oh, black people can't do no wrong. No, we committed some atrocities as well. But like I said, right, like they see these things and they see them being displayed on the big screen, and it's like, this is like all we're like, there's like this blanket of like, this is all black people are. And because of this like attitude of wanting to reconnect with what we once were, I'll put it like this. In the movie Jurassic Park, there's the character Ian. I used to think this guy was crazy, but as I got older, I started to see like, no, this guy was actually talking sense. And he tells John Hammond, who created the Jurassic Park, the Jurassic Park theme park. He tells him to his face, he's like, yeah, no, like you and your scientists were so obsessed with whether if you could create dinosaurs that you never stopped to think if you should. Because dinosaurs, they had their shot, they lived when they lived and they died when they died, and man came and touched the earth, and there's a reason why they lived and died off, and why we're here now, and why we don't coexist. And so that very same question or very same logic is applied like to anything, from my perspective. Like I apply it to everything, especially with something like this. Like, okay, just because my ancestors may have practiced this, especially because I'm Nigerian, just because my ancestors practiced this, does that make it right? Does that mean like, oh, like, yeah, like this is it, like this is it, right? Because I look at it like this, right? The Coptics, right? The Egyptians, right? We see in scripture, right, that they worshipped false gods. They did some very atrocious things, very, very, very atrocious things. And guess what happened? God made a fool of their gods and smited their pharaoh, pretty much, and his armies. Literally, like, brought like 10 plagues upon the land of Egypt in an effort for Pharaoh to listen to Moses when he says, "Free my people," like, let my people go in the name of Yahweh. And so, just because, like, my point is, like, the Coptics, they're a prime example of this, and thankfully, like, they became Christian. But we see that just because you have ties to something, right, doesn't automatically make you right, or doesn't automatically make what your ancestors practiced right. You get me? It really doesn't. And so it's the same logic that I approach with this sort of, like, thing where I see people on social media and they're like, yeah, no, like, we as black people, we got to get back to, like, root work and stuff like that. And I saw this young lady on Facebook. She was talking about, like, how one of the characters, her name's Annie in the movie, right? She's the love interest of Michael B. Jordan in the movie. And you see her kind of, like, working with, like, roots and like different herbs and stuff. She the hoodoo practices and stuff. And this young lady, she was like, she was like, yeah, no, like, Annie was a high priestess, and you black people, like, you guys are, like, scared to really dive into your ancestry and your history of what your ancestors practiced, all just because Christianity said that it was bad and all this other stuff and everything. And she even went as far as to say, like, the book of Psalms is like a book of spells, which, how dare she? May the Lord have mercy on her. But yeah, she was just kind of, like, pushing this narrative, like, as if, like, this is all black people, like, all Africans, this is all that we practiced. To which I offer the perspective of everybody listening to this, that that's not true. That is not all that black people are limited to. This is a lie that Hollywood sells us. This is a lie that Hollywood and the media sells us, as if we're like savages who just meddle with spiritual powers that we have no control over. And we just, this is just how we lived life. You get me? Like, no, like, the truth of the matter is that this is not all that black people practice. Not all black people were hoodoos, hoodoo priestesses, voodoo priests, and juju practitioners, right? Like, nobody, like, not everybody was practicing this. And prime example, I always bring this up, the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Church, right, who has a very long line and heritage and culture of Judaism going all the way back to the times of the Torah, right? Ethiopians, right, the Habesha people, right, they have a very long line of Judaism in their culture, and was one of the first places to accept and practice Christianity, along with ancient Armenia. Was one of the first places to accept and practice Christianity as the official religion, and they still practice it today. And so to say that this is all black people practices, or this is all African, like this, like African culture is just pagan worship, is just false. It's literally just false. And all it takes is a little history reading and some research. It's literally just false. And when you think about it too, like a lot of the pagan rituals and practices that you find in, let's say, like Greek mythology and like Greek pagan worship and like old African spirituality and stuff like that, it's really like a lot of what these other groups, and more than just those other groups that I just named, but a lot of what these other groups practice are just like bastardized versions of what we practice as Christians. Like, for example, the whole getting in contact with your ancestors thing in African spirituality. Bro, that's literally the bastardized version of what we practice as Christians called intercession of the saints. It's just a very, very dark version of it. Very, very dark and unorthodox version of it, right? Where you just contact your ancestors for, like, wisdom and guidance and knowledge about stuff. Versus in intercession of the saints, mind you, this isn't something that Christians made up out of thin air, but it actually goes back to the ancient Jewish practice called prayers to the Zedakim, right? Prayers to the holy ones or the righteous ones. And what the practice was you would go to the grave of a, we'll use the language, the saint or the righteous one. You go to the grave of that righteous person, and here's where most people be like, oh, this is necromancy. No, it's not. Necromancy was you would go to the grave of the person, of that dead person, and you would either ask the familiar spirit of that dead person to either use your body as a vehicle or for future knowledge. That's not what prayers to the Zedakim is, nor is it what intercession of the saints is. Prayers to the Zedakim and intercession of the saints was when you would go to intercession of the saints, not really, but prayers to the Zedakim, you would go to the grave of that dead person, and you would ask the spirit of that dead person to intercede on your behalf to God. So you would ask that person who passed on to pray to God for you, to bring your prayers before God. And all of this is pretty much to show the connection between the spiritual and the divine. I mean, not the spiritual and the divine, the human realm and the divine, right? It's a working of it. It's a working together of it, right? So you're not asking for future knowledge. You're not asking for your body to be used as a vehicle. You're literally just asking, can you bring my prayers before God? Can you pray for me? Can you, can you ask God for me, right? That's all you're asking. That's all you're doing. Intercession of the saints, same deal, right? Only you don't go to the grave of a person, right? You literally just, like, for example, right? We ask the Holy Theotokos, right? Mother Mary, Blessed Virgin, Mother Mary, Blessed Virgin, intercede for us, intercede on our behalf to your Son. Right? That's all it is. Right? The whole root work thing and stuff in these practices, right? Literally we use frankincense. Right? Frankincense, that's literally what we use. And frankincense, as we see in the Old Testament, was used as a way to cloud the presence of God so that nobody would die. Right? So in the Old Testament worship, that's literally what the censer was, or what frankincense was used for. It was used to cloud people. I mean, not cloud people. It was used to cloud God's presence. Not to mention, it smells delightful. Same thing in the liturgical practices today, right? In both Orthodox and Catholic churches, when the priest takes the censer and he's swinging the censer, right? It represents our prayers, right? As we see in the book of Revelation, a elder has a bowl of incense, and they represent the prayers of the saints. And so as the smoke goes up, that represents our prayers going up to God. So whenever the priest is swinging the censer, and it lets out the smoke, that's the time where everybody starts to pray, and our prayers go up to God like smoke. So yeah, right. This whole idea that, like, all that black people were practicing in Africa was juju, hoodoo, and voodoo it's just false, dude. And it's a lie that's sold to us constantly, and we just blindly sip the Kool-Aid as if it's gospel. And like I even bring up this point as well. Christianity is not the white man's religion, especially if it was in Ethiopia long before it reached Europe. And long before the Europeans even came over and tried to evangelize, right? It was already over there, right? Like, you ask the Ethiopians, right? They'll say that, yeah, no, like, you go to Acts chapter 8, like, that's the pioneer right there, you know? Like, that's Ethiopia right there, right? Acts chapter 8, verse 30, I want to say, yeah, well, not starting at verse 37, but that's where the Ethiopian eunuch gets baptized. And then it was said that he went back to Ethiopia and spread Christianity. I forgot his name, but they actually have his name. But in the Bible, he's just called the Ethiopian eunuch. But yeah, no, like that. This whole idea that like this is all black people practiced is just false. And some of the greatest theologians, some of the greatest people who did works for Christianity were black, right? Like, I'll name like 3 right now, like Tertullian of Carthage, right? He's not a church father, but he was a brilliant theologian, right? Gave a great explanation and gave a great apologetic for the Trinity, even if he had a weird view on it. Gave a great defense for the Trinity, and praxis of the faith, right? Tertullian of Carthage, mind you, this is long before any transatlantic slave trade, and long before like 1700s Jim Crow, all that stuff, right? This is long before all of that stuff, right? You have Tertullian of Carthage, you have Abba Moses, the Ethiopian, or Moses the Black, or Moses the Strong, whichever one you want to call him, right? In his early life was a robber, right? But then, in turning his life around, became one of the greatest desert fathers, as we call them, but a Christian monastic, and had tons of fruitful wisdom, and is a saint among all the Oriental Orthodox churches. And then you have Clement of Alexandria, right? One of the greatest Christians who gave great writings on philosophy, in defense for the faith and everything, and was one of the leading theologians in the Alexandrian school of theology. And so this idea that like Christianity was forced on our people, no, it wasn't. It wasn't forced on our people, right? It was not forced on our people. Black people came to Christianity of their own free volition, of their own free will, when it was revealed to them. It was not forced on our people, right? Like this idea that it was forced on us comes from this like closed-minded narrative that when when black people are enslaved, and we're out in the cotton fields, and we're picking cotton and stuff, that's when Christianity was forced on us. That's not true. That is totally not true. And if anybody says this stuff, it just kind of shows their ignorance, because these are the same people that say like, oh yeah, Christianity teaches slavery. Clearly you haven't read Exodus or Leviticus, where the Bible literally condemns slavery. God hates it, right? Like, you just don't know the difference between a bondservant who's doing labor versus somebody who's like literally being taken of their own, who's literally being taken against their will. You don't know the difference between somebody who's like working for wage versus somebody who's being taken against their free will, right? So yeah, man, and I do think like this is the modern day slavery. Like, when black people are just so close-minded that like, yeah, this is all we are, and this is all we are, and this is all we'll ever be. Listen, all it takes is the question of like, okay, just because my ancestors did this, does that make it right? Because by that very logic, if I come from a long line of Italian mobsters, right, then does that automatically mean I should join the family business? No, I shouldn't. Right? Like, no. Just because my ancestors or my predecessors practice something doesn't automatically make it right. Right? If anything, it's up to me to look into it and discern it and see like, okay, is this right or is it wrong? So yeah, man. Yeah. Overall, Sinners, great movie artistically. But black people, man, we gotta do better, man.